to see you in the study. Come with me across that ethereal boundary that surrounds the peace and calm of the study. Let's go where the imagination goes, where fantasy flies, where dreams float like stories from a forgotten book. Today we look at the life and illustrations of Arthur Rackham, one of the most celebrated artists of what has been termed the British Golden Age of illustration, that lasted from about 1850 to the end of the First World War, and was indeed a golden age of the publication of children's books. I have made a cup of tea and taken some books from the shelf. I'll be paging through these books as we listen to the story of Arthur Rackham. Arthur Rackham was born in London on the 19th of September 1867, one of 12 siblings and the third surviving child of Annie and Alfred Rackham. His early education was at the prestigious City of London School, and during that time he won a few prizes for drawing. When he was 17, he was sent to Australia because of his fragile health, and was accompanied there by his two aunts. The shipping route between Australia and England seems indeed to have been a very busy route at that time. At 18, Arthur worked as a clerk at the Westminster Fire Office, a job that financed his part-time study at the Lambeth School of Art. By 1892, he was working as a reporter and illustrator for the Westminster Budget and a number of other London newspapers. Arthur also contributed occasional illustrations to magazines such as Scraps and Chums, and produced his first book illustrations for the travel guide To the Other Side by Thomas Rhodes in 1893, and the Dolly Dialogues in 1894, which were collected sketches of Anthony Hope, later author of The Prisoner of Zenda. This marked the beginning of Arthur Rackham's illustrious lifelong career in illustration, and he received his first commission in 1896 for the illustrations for The Zanky Wank and The Bletherwitch in 1896, one of the several nonsense books that had been popular at the time, not the least of which were published by Lewis Carroll. Arthur's pen and ink illustrations gained popularity after the publication of the richly illustrated Ingoldsby Legends in 1898, Gulliver's Travels, and Fairy Tales of the Brothers Grimm, both in 1900. The years of the Boer War, 1899 to 1902, were austere ones for Britain, contributions to children's periodicals, such as Little Folks and Cassell's magazine, furthered his reputation as a pen and ink fantasy illustrator, taking the children's minds from the tribulations of the adult world. In 1900, Arthur met Edith Starkey, a portrait artist and his future wife, with whom he enjoyed a close and mutually stimulating relationship. It was her influence that helped him expand his artistic range, developing his technique from line drawing to integrating color washes and intricate watercolor glazing. This was at a time when technological advances in the printing process were growing, and Arthur made use of photomechanical reproduction of his work rather than relying on an engraver as middleman. This technique allowed him to display his talent for line as well as make use of the three-color printing process, producing luxurious colors and sumptuous detail. The images were then tipped in or pasted into the book after printing, a process that gave rise to the new gift book market. You might have some of these books around your home or have seen them in bookshops or libraries with the color plates pasted into the pages. In 1901, Rackham moved to Witchcombe Studios near Haverstock Hill, and in 1903 he and Edith were married. In 1905, Arthur's full-color plates were included by Heinemann, a London publisher, in Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle, the first widely distributed gift book containing 51 of Arthur's color plates, and rendering him the leading decorative illustrator of the Edwardian period. Arthur created each plate by first painstakingly drawing his subject with a sinuous pencil line before applying a heavy layer of India ink. Then he glazed the picture with layer upon layer of delicate watercolor washes, evoking the Art Nouveau style, to build up what has been described as romantic yet calmly ethereal images that became his trademark. With the publication of his illustrations for Rip Van Winkle, Rackham promoted each book with an exhibition at the Leicester Galleries in London. Attending there was a certain J.M. Barrie, who was so impressed by Rackham's work that he asked him to illustrate Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens in 1906. This book became the outstanding Christmas gift book of 1906 and was a tremendous commercial and cultural success. It contains the prehistory, as it were, of the character who would become Peter Pan. Soon after came Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in 1907, further catapulting Rackham to fame. In fact, he was in such high demand that he often had to decline commissions. He was offered so many. It was during this time that he declined a contract to illustrate Kenneth Graham's classic, The Wind in the Willows, so that he could complete A Midsummer Night's Dream, a decision he later came to regret. His Shakespearean drawings, however, were a great success. Published in 1908, the Arthur Rackham Fairies feature some of his best-known works, with his signature gnarled trees and droves of fairies representing the visual reality of the dream for thousands of readers. Then followed in rapid succession Ondine in 1909, The Rheingold and the Valkyrie in 1910, and Siegfried and the Twilight of the Gods in 1911, containing some of Rackham's finest illustrations. In addition to illustrating books, Arthur won a gold medal at the Milan International Exhibition that same year, and another one at the Barcelona International Exposition in 1912. He even had his works exhibited at the Louvre in 1914. After the First World War, he began to produce works for the American market, illustrating books such as Where the Blue Begins by Christopher Morley in 1925, Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in 1928, and Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Mystery and Imagination in 1935. A member of the Art Workers Guild, Rackham was elected its master in 1919. The post-war years were very lucrative for Arthur. He, Edith, and their daughter Barbara lived in Chalcot Gardens in London, and in 1920 moved to Houghton, West Sussex. In 1929 the family settled into a newly built property in Limpsfield, Surrey. In 1936 Arthur was given a second chance to illustrate The Wind in the Willows, which he welcomed. However, by this time he was suffering from fatigue and failing health. Painstakingly he worked and reworked the drawings to his exacting satisfaction. The result was a masterpiece of children's illustration and a beautiful reminder of the innocence and sensibilities of the Victorian age. Arthur Rackham died from cancer in 1939 at his home in Limpsfield. Through his distinctive skill and artistic imagination, combining haunting humor with dreamlike romance, Arthur Rackham has become one of the best known and loved English illustrators. His technique was novel at first, and he incorporated new technology to his benefit, perfecting different ways of putting his ideas to picture. He would first lightly block in shapes and details of his drawing with a soft pencil. Over this, he would then carefully work in lines of pen and India ink, removing the pencil traces as the drawing began to take form. For color pictures, he preferred the three-color process of printing, which reproduced delicate half-tones of photography through letterpress printing. He would do this by building up multiple thin washes of watercolor to create translucent tints. One of the disadvantages of the three-color printing process in the early years was that definition could be lost in the final print. To compensate for this, he would over-ink his drawings after printing. Another technique Rackham used in his illustrations was silhouette cuts, as can be seen in his Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. Rackham's distinctive element of style was that of exuberant frivolity in the images he would depict, conjuring imagination and rendering a non-threatening yet exciting thrill to the audience, young and old alike, making them both endearing and frightening. Throughout his work, his prolific, looming, and sometimes frightening anthropomorphic trees can be seen. Their detailed bark, knots and gnarls set in the scenes for the wild and dangerous tales over which they preside. Additionally, Rackham's figures, both men and women, exude a peculiar charm, reflecting his gift of infusing scholarship with caprice, and so with emotion. Much of his style can be seen as a fusion of Northern European style, strongly influenced by the Japanese woodblock printing tradition of the early 19th century. Undine, in particular, was a true classic of the genre. This medieval German romance tells the story of a water spirit who marries a knight named Hildebrand in order to gain a soul. Its rediscovery and subsequent popularity demonstrating the neo-Gothic movement related to the arts and crafts, Art Nouveau, and romantic movements in art, design, and literature, as well as thought. We can see, too, some possible influences, if not directly, then established in the psyche of the 19th century, in the inky, nebulous drawings of Victor Hugo, and thence see so much of the interconnectedness of ideas in art and imagination. Let's look at Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens by J.M. Barrie, with Arthur Rackham's illustrations. This is a lovely book and a beautiful story. When Barrie was taking care of David, a little boy who was about 4, he would walk with him in Kensington Gardens. He was one of the Llewellyn Davies boys, and he and David made up a story about where babies come from and how they come to have illustrations as well as his inky watercolors really bring this little boy's imagination to life, as Barry wrote it. And I think it remains a childhood favorite more than 100 years after publication. Here you can see the children with their nannies and their toys and their dogs on an outing in Kensington Gardens next to Hyde Park. The book opens with a grand tour of the gardens. And this is written from the child's perspective. However, you can take it into the gardens today, and most of it will look very similar, and you will be able to recognize everything that J.M. Barrie and little David saw. And you can see the trees here in Rackham's trademark treatment of them with their gnarls and knots. Even today, you can see these trees in Kensington Gardens. There's so many beautiful illustrations here. The dark colors, and layers of watercolor. And on the Serpentine is Bird Island, which is still there, and that's where all the babies are born, according to David's story. All of the special eggs are hatched by special birds on Bird Island until they're ready to come into their cribs as babies, and then they lose their bird wings and forget that they ever were birds. Look at these trees. I admit that until I saw Rackham's illustrations, leafless trees did not hold the same allure. And they are the fairies that reside in the gardens and only come out after the gates are closed. And there's Peter deciding that he did not want to be a baby, he wanted to be a bird. And he could still fly. He flew out of his window and back to Bird Island. But then he forgot how to fly. And this is the story of how poor Peter finally found his way off of Bird Island, befriended the fairies, and inhabited the magical, dusky night time of Kensington Gardens. These are some of Rackham's finest color illustrations. There's poor Peter speaking with Solomon Caw, the elder bird on the island. These beautiful pen and ink drawings. Sometimes the color is unnecessary, and then other times these inky glazes of watercolors and layer upon layer gives it so much depth, but also gives character to everything in the foreground. It's as if it's plumbing the depths of your imagination, stopping to pull at those long-forgotten memories, half-remembered stories, and it evokes all kinds of images with all of the inky blurs. One of my favorite things that Rackham does is the way he treats water. It's as if everything in it you can see flowing with the currents. There's Solomon Caw on the 5-pound note. And the stocking. It is really a remarkable, charming story, told completely from David's mind, narrated by Barry. Probably helped a little bit, but you can completely see how a 4-year-old boy would have made this story up walking through the park. It's full of that childhood imagination. As Peter sailing, he had to take off his nightgown and use it as a sail and sail the thrush's nest. And he finally was able to go into the gardens and look at that bark and gnarled tree. The fairies and Peter. You see that blue inky background with the leaves in the foreground. You can almost feel the wind, and the air currents and the water currents in Rackham's illustrations. Look at that. You can feel the soft air of the summer, and the cold wind of the autumn. And there's no end of detail to be found in these pen and ink drawings. They certainly evoke all kinds of images. Look at these trees with their ears and eyes and mouths. You can almost imagine they're alive. And these are the linkmen in front carrying the winter cherries. Those little berries that stay on the plants. It's as if so many styles are so expertly and seamlessly integrated in these beautiful illustrations. That the little people are so tiny, the subjects of the picture, and up here we have this image, some kind of anthropomorphic tree, the roots reaching down and moss growing on it. And if you stare long enough, you might see a face and fancy that that tree is trying to tell you something. It's looking on while the people in the foreground and there is Peter in the inky sky that lightens with a fairies orchestra, and he's playing the panpipes as a baby who never grew up. Well, my friend, it has been lovely to have you here in the study to share these beautiful illustrations and art of Arthur Rackham. I wish you beautiful, fantastical dreams. Be good to yourself